Hey folks, today we are starting a new unit. We are done with the Middle Ages. Now we will reference it from time to time because Middle Ages are going to have an effect on our next time period that we're going to talk about in Western Europe, and that is the Renaissance. Now, the Renaissance is a fancy French word that means rebirth. We did watch this corny video in class, so give that check that out if you're on the it's not Nearpod anymore, sorry, Pear Deck. Okay, the Pear Deck, you can check that out. It's posted on Canvas. If we're going to talk about the Renaissance and describe it, it's often called a rebirth of art, literature, and science. Now, rebirth might be kind of a weird term to you. You might use the word reawakening or rediscovery, right, of art, literature, and science. So around the 1300s, scholars in Western Europe, they started to what used to be the Roman Empire, right, and then was like the barbarian kingdoms, and now is turning into these countries with these monarchies, these rulers like England, France, Spain, Italy, places like that. They start to develop an interest in classical writings. Now, when we say classical, we mean Greek and Latin, Greek and Roman. So people in the Middle Ages, in Europe during the Renaissance, they start to rediscover old Greek books and stories, old Roman stories and mythology, right? Plays. And they start to begin and accept some of those old Greek and Roman ideas that are called classical. Scholars also started to put an extra importance on humans or people. And this study and focus on humans is called humanism. Okay? People who study humans, humanists. Now, the reason they started doing this, okay? Religion, specifically Christianity, was very important in Western Europe during the Middle Ages. In fact, the church, even when there was war and chaos and all these kingdoms fighting, the church was kind of the only consistent thing there. And so the religion was very important for a lot of people. Well, after the plague came and killed a lot of people, their religion was still important to them. So Christianity was still important. But people started to realize, you know what, life is kind of short. Like, I may catch a plague and die any day. So I'm always thinking about heaven. I'm always thinking about God and religion, and that's fine. But why am I not looking around and studying life and the earth and humans and nature? And so, along with rediscovering the old Greek and Roman books and ideas, they also started looking around at the natural world around them and started studying. Okay? So they started to rediscover a lot of what the Greeks and the Romans had focused on for a long time. Okay? So they get their ideas from the Greeks and the Romans. Humanism is the study of humans in the natural world. The plague and all the people who died in that tragic event inspired humanism. People kind of realized, hey, you only live once. And so I want to kind of focus not only on religion and the afterlife and whatever, but also enjoying the natural world. Okay, what does it mean to be human? And so they had this renaissance, or this rebirth of their minds and studying. Okay, school was very different. So the Renaissance started initially in a town called Florence in Italy. It's a city in Italy. And then it's going to later spread throughout Europe to other major cities and towns. So it starts around 1350. It's going to end around 1600. Now, in Renaissance, there was a big boom in art. Okay, Renaissance artists, they did continue to work for the church and paint and sculpt religious paintings, religious sculptures, religious subjects, so scenes from the Bible. But they also started to paint and sculpt old Greek and Roman mythology and stories. They started painting and sculpting daily life and maybe political government figures. Okay, they started to focus on humans, right? And they wanted to make their paintings and their sculptures as realistic as possible. So not only did they focus on humanism, so studying humans, but they also wanted to be as realistic as possible, which is called realism. Okay? One of the things they did to make that happen was they used a technique called perspective. And that basically is when you're drawing or painting or sculpting something to make it look three-dimensional. Okay, so it's not flat on a paper, but when you look at it, you use shading, use different perspective and reference points to make something look deep, to make something look realistic. That's called perspective. And they began to look back at Roman and Greeks for inspiration in their architecture and their building as well. So what is realism? So for example, this is a famous painting called The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. He painted this. It depicts a religious scene, a scene from the Bible, Jesus eating with his disciples. But he went for realism, right? He wanted to, use realistic color, use realistic shading, make people look more realistic, and we'll see what we're comparing that to in a second. But he's also going to use depth, right? Perspective. We see there's stuff in the background that's further away, stuff in the front closer to us. It looks realistic. Now, why perspective is such a big deal? Why making things 3D is such a big deal? During the Middle Ages, this is the kind of art on the left that was coming out of Europe. It was flat, two-dimensional, kind of like a crappy cartoon. All right? This is from a famous work called the Bayeux Tapestry. But in the Renaissance, they were focused on humans, human subjects. They were focused on humanism and realism. So they wanted to make things more realistic. So they're using the realistic coloring, the realistic shading. They're having kind of a focal point in the back, and then everything's moving in these lines, kind of moving out towards us, so that things that are closer in the front of the painting look bigger. Okay? That's realism. That's perspective. So realism is trying to make things more realistic. Perspective is one way to do that. That is using depth, okay, or trying to make things look 3D. Now, two very famous Renaissance artists that we're going to talk about, Leonardo da Vinci is one, and Michelangelo. Leonardo da Vinci is a very famous painter and inventor. Michelangelo, a painter and a sculptor, very famous for his sculptures. Now, if you're looking at me like Mr. Hildebrand, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, you're not going to fool me. Those are the Ninja Turtles. Okay, you're right, they are. But the Ninja Turtles are actually named after Renaissance artists. And that's because the creators of the Ninja Turtles were art students, and their favorite artists were the Renaissance artists. This is a quick video we watched about Michelangelo, so check that out to learn a little bit more about him. For Da Vinci, some of his most famous paintings were the Mona Lisa. You've probably seen that one before. The Last Supper, which we looked at earlier. He was also an inventor and scientist, so we'll talk about him later. We're not done with him. Michelangelo, one of his most famous paintings, was found on the ceiling of a church in Rome called the Sistine Chapel. I'll show you that in a second. But he was more famous for being a sculptor. He was able to turn stone into these realistic human figures, and was just very famous for his realism and his humanism. Okay? Two famous ones are the David and the Pieta. You might recognize them in a second. So this is Michelangelo's work. This is the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It was inside a church, and so he was paid by the church to but paint scenes from the Bible on the church ceiling. The creation of Adam is a very famous one. You might have seen that, where Adam from the Bible and God are touching fingers. We have the David right here. You might have seen the David before. The Pieta, which is another religious scene where it is Jesus being held by his mother after being executed. Okay. All right. Now, folks, for your project, these artists in the Renaissance, they were paid for their artwork. Okay, they were commissioned. That's what commission means. It means getting paid for their artwork. So you're going to be creating a little bit of art yourself. During the Renaissance, the artists were commissioned, were hired by city governments and the wealthy and the church to create paintings and sculptures. You're going to be hired for a grade, not real money, because you know your teacher's broke. Okay, only has half of a Chipotle gift card, not even a full one. But you're going to be hired by your teacher to create a piece of artwork for the classroom in the school. I'm going to hang these up in the room and in the hallways. Your art must represent several Renaissance themes, including humanism, so it must focus on people. Perspective, different distances, okay? So try to make it as realistic as possible. Put smaller things in the back, bigger things in the front. Try to show some depth with some color and some shading. And then realistic coloring and shading, okay? Try to make it as close as real. You may be as creative as you like, but remember, it's going to be displayed in the classroom in the school, so make it school appropriate. Okay? You may create a drawing painting. Actually, I had a student do this a couple years back, a little painting. I've had students do drawings. I don't have any within arm's reach. I've had students make kind of origami sculptures. I've had some people who really liked working with clay, and so they made a clay sculpture. Okay, really, you can get as creative as you want as long as you have humanism, perspective, coloring, and shading. Now, folks, if this is a big struggle for you, and you're not so sure, you're a little nervous, don't worry. As long as I can see those three, humanism, perspective, and coloring, shading, you're going to be okay. If you're still nervous about it, okay, come talk to me, send me an email. We'll work something out. If you want to bring this into the 21st century, right, and you're somebody who likes to work with Illustrator and other maybe computer programs to make illustrations, to make art, as long as you hit those three, okay, humanism, perspective, coloring, and shading, you'll be good. Okay. If you're struggling, if you need help, if you're nervous, email me, pull me aside, we'll talk. But this is what we need from you today. Okay. You're being commissioned, paid by a grade, okay, to create some artwork for me. All right, thanks, folks, and good luck.